So I have logged into lawschool.tr.com. This is where you should log into Westlaw from. Just a couple of things here. We have a lot of helpful information. We have our on-demand learning if you want to go in and get certified in learning how to use Westlaw a little bit more in depth. If you ever need to find me, underneath where your name is a link that says contact us. And my photo and my link to my email will be there as well. And so this is just where you can find a lot of resources to learn a little bit more about Westlaw, as well as getting in touch with me if you have Westlaw questions in the future. To access Westlaw Precision, you can just click on the drop down or access the button here over on the right side of the screen. I'm going to go ahead. I already have Westlaw Precision opened and go ahead and get started. So this is our platform, Westlaw Precision. And a lot of times students will ask me, what is Westlaw? And the best answer that I have for you is trying to imagine taking the law library and putting it onto your laptop in a searchable format. That being said, everything that's in the law library isn't necessarily on Westlaw, and everything that's on Westlaw isn't necessarily in the law library. So one of the biggest things that I want to leave you with and empower you with today is starting to learn the content that you have access to. Now, you're here today because of legal research and writing, but you'll be using Westlaw in the future if you make law review or journal, if you're in the clinic, if you're on one of the moot court teams for your seminar paper classes, if you're a research assistant. So any of those avenues over the next few years will be a reason for you to learn and to utilize Westlaw. And so again, I just want to really show you how to get started, but also to encourage you to keep learning and to really realize what you have access to. So before I run a search, there are a couple of things that I'm going to do to get started. And this to me is also a big part of research, and that is staying organized. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on the top where it says folders and then view all. Folders on Westlaw works just like folders in Word or PowerPoint or Excel, and it allows you to keep track of your information and save documents onto your Westlaw password. You can have as many folders as you want. And to create folders, just simply click on the manila folder with the plus sign. And I'm going to call this Louisiana 1L Memo. And can't spell. And throughout the class, I'm going to drop documents into my Louisiana 1L memo folder. And at the end of class, I'm going to show you what has happened to my folder. Right next to folders is a link called My Links, and I'm going to click where it says View All Favorites. So folders save pieces of paper, cases, statutes, articles, texts of treatises that I want to go back and read over and over again. Favorites saves places on Westlaw that I want to go back and access over and over again throughout a project or a semester or a class that I'm working on something kind of long term. And so I'm going to click where it says add a group. And I will also call this Louisiana 1L memo. Again, throughout the class, I'm going to drop databases into my favorites, and I will also show you at the end how I'm going to utilize these. So I'm going to go back to the home page. At the top of the screen, you can enter in anything into this toolbar. You can enter in citations, you can enter in case party names, you can ask a question, you can enter in search terms. So this is a global search. This searches in all of Westlaw in the primary law of the jurisdiction that you've selected over on the right side. So I'm going to type a really simple search. Negligent infliction of emotional distress. I have some additional facts, but right now, let's just say maybe I don't know a lot about NIED and I just want to see what's out there. You can see that Westlaw does have some suggested search prompts. You could select those if you want or use your own. Over on the right side, I would select the jurisdiction that I was researching in. So I'm going to leave mine as Louisiana, but you could change yours to whatever jurisdiction you're researching. I'm going to click Save and click Search. So this is running a search in Louisiana primary law and then all the rest of Westlaw. It's a pretty massive search. So one, I would use this again if I just didn't know that much about negligent infliction of emotional distress. If maybe this was the first time I was researching in Louisiana. I can see my results here on the screen. I can also see where my search terms appear highlighted in yellow and in bold throughout the text of the documents. On the top left, where it says content types, I can click on that to see all of the different categories and the results in those categories that Westlaw pulled up. So I've retrieved over 11,000 documents, briefs, forms, jury information, quite a few secondary sources, some statutes, and cases. So this was an easy way to get started. And if again, this is how you want to start, that's great. I believe we all think differently and might be at different points in our research. But what I'm a big believer in is choosing the path of least research resistance. And that means going to where you think your answer is going to be. So if I know I need cases, why search in all of Westlaw if I know I want cases or maybe a statute or a secondary source? So that's what I want to really, really highlight today. So I'm going to go back to the home office. The home page, and I want to click on this link called content types. So this is where our directory is, and this is where you can find any of the content that we have on Westlaw that is available. So the first place that I want to take you to are secondary sources and highlight this content type. So secondary sources on Westlaw are broken down into kind of three big clusters of information. So you have what I call kind of your big secondary source content. So you have the American Law Reports, which is one of my favorite databases. You have things like jurisprudence and encyclopedias, things like AmJur, Corpus Juris Secundum, any of those kind of national tools that cover both federal and state and are multi-practice area. So you can see those here, things like causes of action, which are really is a great secondary source as well. So this is another good place to begin. You also have things like your restatements, your law reviews and journals, and various text and treatises. So again, this is a good place to explore and see what's out there. I'm going to run a search in the American Law Reports, and we'll click on that. And I'm going to add this to my favorites. On your screen, it would likely say add to favorites anytime you're accessing a new database. And if you maybe don't already have it in a favorites, I will add that to my Louisiana 1L memo. And so here I can now run my search again. And if a search worked well once, I can use it. I could also add anything else that I wanted to my search, but again, maybe I'm just jumping off and I want to see what's out there. Also, because I was only in one database, that's also really limiting my search results. So remember when I was on the homepage and I did that big global search and I had over 10,000 results in secondary sources? That's because it was researching in all secondary sources. So just because I'm now in only American Law Reports, it's a little bit more manageable in my results. Another reason that I really love and I think is really helpful for you to start with a secondary source is I love titles of the articles that I'm looking at. So I can see my search terms again highlighted in yellow and in bold throughout the documents. But what I love about secondary sources is I can hopefully tell a lot by what the article is going to talk about by looking at the titles of the articles themselves. So as I'm going through, I can see if any of these might be helpful to my research. So let's say I want to see the right to recover damages for fear of injury to another or shock or mental anguish at witnessing such injury. So if I click on this article, I can see this and see if there might be anything here that might be related to my research. One of the things that I did want to point out about kind of your bigger secondary sources like AMJUR, ALR, CJS is the articles tend to be really long, but what I like about them is they usually have a nice outline at the top that allows you to jump to that portion of the article that you want to look at. They may also have an index of facts or hypotheticals or issues that are going to be discussed in the article. And then following that index is a list of cases, statutes, rules broken down by jurisdiction. So I can quickly see if there are any in the state of Louisiana that have been referenced in this article. And here are several that might be useful for me. So here we have several of these articles that might be cases that might be related to my research. All right, so maybe I don't have time to go through 174 pages right now. I'm just starting my research, but I want to save this. To save this into that folder I created, I just simply click back on that little manila folder, and I'm going to drop this into my Louisiana 1L memo folder that I created, and I'm going to go back to secondary sources. I'm going to go back to that result list. I'll go back to ALR at the top, and then one more click back to secondary sources. So I could do my search, just as I mentioned, in AMJUR, CJS, causes of action, maybe look under some text and treatises to see if there might be anything else helpful. The next place that you can go into for secondary sources are state secondary sources. So if you are researching a particular state law, starting with a state secondary source is always a good place to begin. So let's go ahead and click into Louisiana. And I can see all of the secondary sources that are geared to the state of Louisiana. There are only 64. So one of the things that I did also want to stress to all of you is to really pause and take some time, especially if you plan on staying in Louisiana or if you're one of the civil law students. There are a lot of great code databases here, for just example. But if you are researching in any other jurisdiction, this is a great place to begin. So I can go through the titles of these volumes of the Louisiana Practice, all of the law reviews and journals, the Louisiana Civil Law Treatise. Just takes a couple of clicks. I can go through to see if there might be anything helpful here. So just takes just a few seconds, go through this list. And just start looking through. And there is a whole volume in the Louisiana Civil Law Treatise on tort law. So this would absolutely be a database that I would want to pause and take a look at. Not only is it from my jurisdiction, but it's also in the practice area that I'm researching. So it's sort of 2 for 1. And why not take a look at some articles that have already been written by an expert either in that jurisdiction or in that practice area or both. So here we have this database. I could run my search at the top, but one other thing that I wanted to highlight here is just looking through a database and seeing if you can open up a database and trying to open it up and seeing everything on the screen. So I could just start opening up the database here and seeing through the entire chapter. If I had a wrongful death issue, perhaps proof of facts, intentional wrongs, anything like that, maybe negligence. So I could just start opening up and looking at anything chapter by chapter as another avenue to start researching. So that is an easy way to get started. I'm going to go ahead and just run my search one more time. And again, remember, just simply because I am in one database, and even more specifically, kind of a part of that database, running my simple search is going to be easier because I'm hopefully really narrowing my universe of potential results. And so right off the bat, here is in chapter 28, section 3, negligent infliction of emotional distress. So another reason that I love looking at secondary sources, particularly in a state, one, the articles tend to be a lot shorter. I can see this is only 5 pages. I will save that into my folder in case I want to come back to it. I also can see the table of contents surrounding this section. So maybe I need the section on bystander damages. That might be helpful. But again, I'm just given background information. It's also leading me to some potential statutes or code articles that might be related. Secondary sources are also really helpful in maybe laying out the elements or just kind of giving you that background information that you're not going to necessarily get from a case or a statute every time. And it might lead me to some additional cases that I can access and start researching a little bit more in depth for my particular arguments that I'm trying to make. Another reason that I like starting looking in a secondary source is one, because I just want to start seeing names of cases and seeing where they appear throughout documents. And that to me is also a really good lesson. And when you start seeing a case listed in this article or that article or cited by this case or that case, it's a good indicator that that's maybe a case that I want to take a look at. So again, just starting with a secondary source is always a good place to begin. I'm going to go back to that main page, to the Louisiana Tort Law Civil Law Treatise, and save that into my favorites. Looks like a good one that I would maybe want to save. And then I will go back to secondary sources. And then the final category, if available for the research that you're doing, are secondary sources broken down by topic or practice area. So I can see here that I would maybe want to look at torts and personal injury, but if you were researching something dealing with family law or criminal law or bankruptcy or immigration, whatever it might be, pause and take a look here to see if there might be something in that practice area. Again, these just may lay out things really nicely for you. This will also teach you what I kind of call the language of that practice area. So it's also a good place to pause and just scroll through the titles to see what might be helpful here. Here's a whole database on the American law of torts. So that just might cover all torts. Again, maybe a good place to start. Part 2 is all about negligence. Maybe I want to take a look at that part of this database. I'll add that to my favorites. And again, I could run my search here, but I just don't want to keep running the same search in just all the databases. So again, this is just secondary sources. All right, I'm going to go back out to the home page. And then the next place that I want to take you into are content types again, and then statutes and court rules. Another place that you can start a research project in are statutes and court rules. If you know that there is a statute or a rule out there guiding your research, it's also a really good place to begin. I started with secondary sources as just one example, but if you know that you have a statute, it's also a good place to start. I like showing this screen because this is where you can find all of your statutes and court rules all in one place. So here's your US code, the Constitution, all of your federal rules, all of your states organized by jurisdiction, as well as some additional ones that are broken down topically. I'm going to hop into Louisiana. And so here you can see your Louisiana revised statutes, the civil code, the code of civil procedure, the children's code, crim pro evidence, and any other sections such as the Constitution of the state of Louisiana. Now, a general rule of thumb for statutes research is to really keep your search simple. Statutes don't play well with terms and connectors or Boolean searching. And a lot of times this isn't a great time to enter in all of your facts or sub issues. Statutes don't look like cases or secondary sources. A lot of times they tend to be short, maybe one or two sentences. Oftentimes, statutes are also broken down with letters, numbers, uppercase, lowercase, Roman numerals, parentheticals. And so a lot of times those terms and connectors don't work very well. So here we have 45 results. Again, not too many because I've really limited my search universe. And so here we have Article 2315, liability for acts causing damages. And then the one I might want to take a look at, Article 2315.6 in the Civil Code, liability for damages caused by injury to another. I will drop this into my favorites, actually into my folder. And here is my statute, 2315.6. So this is actually a good example of what I was just saying. So here we have the letter A, and then we have some numbers and B, and a couple of sentences, and they're pretty short sentences. So again, is this considered a whole sentence? I'm not sure. So again, that's why simple natural language searches work really well in statutes. There are a couple of clicks that you can do here if you have a statute to get started with your research. The first is on the tab at the top called Notes of Decisions. Notes of Decisions are annotations. They are cases that have been read by the West editors in Minnesota. And they're essentially saying, Anna, if you were researching 2315.6, these are some really good cases that have defined or have interpreted the meaning, the purpose of this statute. And more importantly, this is how they've discussed it or why they've discussed that particular statute. And so if I was researching bystander damages or the severity or the extreme conduct, or if they came upon the event, I could click on any of these topics in the notes of decisions to see the cases that have particularly discussed that issue in relation to this section of the Louisiana Civil Code. Another thing that I want you to notice, and we'll get to these when we get to cases, is that these annotations not only reference a case, but they'll also reference a West topic and key number here. And so again, this will be important when I get to the cases part. So this is one easy way to also find cases and to get started with a research project. If you know that you already have a statute, if you know that there's one out there, go ahead and find it. And you can see with one click, I now have quite a few cases to at least start taking a look at. The next click that you can do is on key site citing references. Key site citing references will be everything that has cited to this section in the Louisiana Code. So this could be cases, court documents, as well as secondary sources. So I can see that there are 286 cases that have cited to this, and some of those might be duplicated from the notes of decisions as well as additional ones. I'm going to tag a few of these just to add these to my folder. Again, maybe I'm just getting started and I, don't have time right now to read all of these, but I just want a few to jumpstart. Another option from a statute is sometimes you might be reading the text of the statute and go, I have no idea what this is talking about. Looking at key citing references and then looking at the secondary sources that have talked about it is also a really good place to begin, just simply because hopefully it's going to be a discussion about, liability for damages caused by another. Here are articles, here's causes of action, another one of my favorite databases talking about an IED. I can look through here. Here we have the Louisiana civil practice, AMJUR pleadings and practice, AMJUR proof of facts, another great encyclopedia. And so again, I could take some time to look through some of these articles to see if these might be helpful at helping me understand what I need to prove or what I need my cases to do for me. Also, they might lead me to some additional cases that specifically discuss that. So those are 2 clicks that you can do from your statute that you have, clicking on the notes of decisions, also called annotations, as well as the key citing references to find more cases, as well as get some more analytical information from the secondary sources option. All right, I'm going to go back to Westlaw Precision. And this time I'm going to click into state materials to show you this content area as well. So this is where we have everything broken down by state. I could also go here if I was researching federal law and find all the federal cases, the US code, but I'm going to click into state materials and go into Louisiana. So this is where you can find everything for the state of Louisiana, Louisiana cases, Louisiana statutes, practice materials, regulations, administrative decisions, secondary materials, court documents, anything related to Louisiana. I do realize I didn't save my Louisiana statutes to my favorites, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to go back to that Louisiana page. All right, so one thing I wanted to highlight on this screen and any time that you're researching cases is your first instinct might be to just click right here where it says all Louisiana state and federal cases, and it's a very natural thing. But one of the biggest parts of the research plan is ensuring you're going down that right path. And so if you are researching a state issue and you're really guided by state cases, don't include federal materials in your initial search. I mean, if you need them and they're persuasive and you can't find enough state case law, sure, use them. Definitely discuss with your professors or your TAs to see if that's, applicable. But go to, again, what I call the research path of least resistance. If you need just state cases, go into that smaller database. Don't include federal if you don't need it. If it's helpful and it's binding, sure, of course, add it. I'm going to click into Louisiana state cases and add that to my favorites and run my search again. Again, I'm going to show you here in just a minute how to add things to your search. I've just used my same search. It's worked well so far. Maybe I'm just still feeling out what's out there. And so here we have our results. Sometimes Westlaw will suggest a question or a prompt for you, and you can look at that and see if that might have been helpful. But here are our results down below. So I've retrieved 264 cases. which is definitely manageable. I feel if you're starting to get like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, you definitely need to add something at the top or maybe create a terms and connector search, which I'll talk about here in just a moment. But anytime you're under about 500, 100, or 200, you're definitely in a reasonable range of at least scanning these documents. So I could go through, see where my search terms appear, again, highlighted in yellow and in bold throughout the document, and determine whether or not these look helpful. Over on the left side of the screen, you'll see this option where it says search within results. And you can click on that text box and add something else to your search. So I'm going to add the word severe and click search. So I'm not going to get anything newer in my result list. I'm just going to take those 264 and make it smaller. So I still have my 264. I could hit clear and go back to that original result. But now I've dropped my list to about a little over half to see any of the ones that have talked about the severity of maybe the anguish or the emotional distress that the third party bystander has had. So that is one way to narrow your search. I could have at the top have put negligent infliction of emotional distress in quotes and have done that with the ampersand and severe and run my search that way and just looked for those, that phrase and that term. Over on the right side of the search box, you'll see the advanced link. And this is where you can see all of your connectors. I do caution you of using too many terms and connectors in your searches. I always see students wanting to find that perfect document, the perfect result that is exactly like your hypothetical. I can tell you, I was just at Emory Law School earlier this week, and they were dealing with an alpaca bite. I can also tell you that there are not a lot of cases about alpaca bites on Westlaw, or really. And so they were having to change it and look for cases dealing with dogs or other animals like horses or just, domestic animals and things like that. So don't get caught up so much at the beginning of trying to find something perfect. Instead, get into the ballpark and then use those features over on the left, such as the search within results, to really narrow things up and find those really specifics that you're looking for. Other filters that you can use over on the left side of the screen, a couple that I wanted to point out. The first is a date restriction. If you know the law has changed and you're still getting cases from, the 1920s or the 1950s that may not be applicable, you can add an easy date restriction, the last 3 years, or, all dates after 2020 or 2010 or something like that. Another option is to select the reported versus unreported if you don't really want to look at those unreported decisions, if they're not binding. That's an easy way to filter those out from even having to bother looking through them. So that's another filter that you can use as well. So I did want to highlight those filters over on the left. I'm going to drop a few of these into my folder, just again to show you at the end of class. And I'm going to hop into Spencer v. Valero. At the top of all of our cases, we have what's called the synopsis, which is a quick summary of the case, including some of the facts, the procedural history, and the holding. This is written by West editors. It's not an official part of the opinion, so you cannot cite to the synopsis. Following the synopsis are what's called the West headnotes, which are all of the legal issues that were argued and discussed in the opinion in order in which they appear in the opinion. So it's essentially an outline of the case. So it really gives you, again, a quick snapshot into letting you know what happened before you go into reading 46 pages of an opinion. So I could scroll through the head notes to see what happened in this case, to see if it's helpful to me, if it's related to the research that I'm doing. I'm going to scroll down to head note number 15. Head notes will vary from case to case. Some might have one or two, some might have 20 or 30. And so I'm looking at head note number 15, and this is talking about infliction of emotional distress. And I can see over on the right side of the screen some topic and key numbers. I'm going to get to those in just a second. But let's say I'm reading this and I want to go into that part of the opinion where this is discussed. I would just click on that head note number and it would take me to that part of the opinion. I can also highlight this if I was going to pretend I was copying and pasting and let go of my mouse. I can add a note and a highlight to this. Good for NIED issue. And it would save that note onto the case. I can also highlight something if I wanted to. That didn't grab enough. I can highlight without taking notes if I don't want to, fill up my side with a bunch of notes. If I know I'm going to do all the rules in orange or all the facts in blue, I can highlight however I want to. And because I already saved this, this is automatically saving onto the case in my folder as well, so I don't have to keep saving over and over again. But I want to go back up to the head notes. So there are a couple of clicks that I can do from here. One of the first ones is let's say I'm looking at head note number 15 and I'm like, I want every case in Louisiana just like this. That's also talking about infliction of emotional distress, an injury to third parties, and the severity of the injury to the plaintiff. That's one of my critical elements that I'm discussing. It was really traumatizing. And so if I click on this topic and key number, it's kind of like a hashtag. Think of a hashtag. It will automatically run a search in the database of the case that I'm in. And it will pull up all of the cases where that topic and key number also appear. The West editors have already read and have organized and broken down the cases for me. This is one of the fastest ways to find every case on a particular issue. I can also save a topic and key number to my favorites, so I can use it over and over again. But here's the real power of the topic and key number system. One of the top questions or issues that I hear from 1Ls is, I found a case, but it's not in my jurisdiction. It would be perfect. So don't think that you can't use a case just because it's not in your jurisdiction. Stop and look at those head notes. And let's say maybe I want to find cases in Texas or New York or North Carolina that talk about negligent infliction of emotional distress and bystander claims. So if I just change Louisiana to those jurisdictions, there are the results. So without even creating my own search or accessing those databases, with that one change of jurisdiction click, I now have cases in New York, North Carolina, and Texas, hopefully, that talk about infliction of emotional distress and the severity of the injury to the plaintiff. So look at those head notes and look at those corresponding topic and key numbers. Remember, you also saw those in the annotations, the notes of decisions of your statute, and you will oftentimes also see key numbers in articles in secondary sources. Okay, I'm going to click back on the history at the top to hop back to Valero, Spencer v. Valero. There are a couple of clicks at the top of cases that you can also use. The first is the table of authorities. This is a list of all the cases that were cited by the Spencer court or whatever case you were looking at. And so if you like Spencer, these might be some cases you would want to spend some time and maybe at least look through these. They're 41, so it might take a minute or so. I could do a search within these results and look to see if any of them talk about mental anguish, severity, bystander, anything that you want to research. I can see on what page in Spencer it cited, if it quoted it, and how much they discussed it. The next click that you can do is on Key Cite Citing References, which is everything that has since cited to Spencer. So Table of Authorities is sort of the past of Spencer. That's what happened before. And citing references is what's happened since. So these are cases that have cited to Spencer, secondary sources that have cited to Spencer. So just like I did with secondary and with my statutes, each content type will cite to the other. So no matter which content type you want to start with, hopefully you can find related materials. And again, that's what I wanted to empower you with today, that we all think differently. We're all at different parts. I might be interested in a statute, but you might be interested in an article, or you just want to go ahead and dive into cases first. So no matter which content type you start with, any of them will be helpful in getting you additional resources. So in some of your cases, I'm going to go back to that initial citation list that I had. So let me go back to my search. In some of your cases, you might start seeing some little symbols, some flags. So let me scroll down and see. Oh, well, all of these are apparently good. Here we have Moresi v. State. So I'll hop into Moresi. So you might see some symbols, sometimes two, such as in this example. And so the symbols are from our citator called KeyCite. And so you'll see those here. To see the KeyCite legend, you can always see it by clicking on the KeyCite icon at the top of the screen. The flags and the symbols are telling you something about the document that you're looking at. So a yellow flag will indicate that there's negative treatment to your case, but nothing that has been reversed or overruled in the direct line. So right now, I know that Moresi is still good law for what it stands for, but I may want to click on the negative treatment tab at the top to see why cases didn't agree with it for some reason. A red flag would indicate that your case is no longer good law for at least one point of law, that something in the direct line has impacted it. And I would want to click on the history tab to see what happened. A red stripe flag would indicate that a case outside of your direct line has impacted your case for a specific point of law. And so again, I would want to click on the history and the negative treatment tabs to see what has happened. A blue stripe flag would indicate that your case has been appealed to the U.S. Courts of Appeal or to the Supreme Court. And the overruling risk symbol, such as in Moresi as well, indicates that something in the table of authorities is no longer good law. So you might want to see how Moresi relied upon that case to see if that has impacted the way you're using Moresi. So our system is strictly a warning system, letting you know that something has happened. And so I might want to see those negative cases, the negative treatment, to see what has happened and see if that impacts my use of this case in any way. So I can scroll through these cases. I can see that State v. Jackson in the table of authorities has overruled. State v. Church might be a case that Moresi has relied upon, and I would maybe need to check that out. If I had the red flag or the red striped flag on my case, I would need to see the history to see how that has impacted the case that I'm looking at and how I'm using it. One thing that I did want to stress is that just because there's a red flag, it doesn't mean that you can't use it. Remember, a lot of times cases are affirmed in part and vacated in part. So just because it has a red flag, don't think, well, I can't use it. You just need to dig a little deeper to see what has happened to that case. And then the final click between citing references and table of authorities is the option called cited with. I've hopped out of Spencer, but it's still here as well. So cited with is kind of what I call cousin cases, where that case didn't cite to it, that case didn't cite back to it, but these cases are often cited together. So I can see that Moresi and Bennett v. Conoco have been cited to 34 times together by other cases. So I would maybe want to see why. Why have they been cited to together? Well, this one was about environmental law. Oh, well, White v. Monsanto, this was an intentional infliction of emotional distress case, and they've been cited to 23 times together. So, you know, Moresi didn't cite to White, and White didn't cite to Moresi, but they've been cited to 23 times together. So I might want to take a look at White and see why. Maybe it's also a really good case. So with just a few clicks, when you start with a case with KeyCite, with your head notes and key numbers, you can source gather really quickly. All right, I know I have just a few more minutes. I'm going to click back on Westlaw Precision. And I'm going to, well, I've already clicked on mine defaults to Westlaw AI assisted research. So this is our assisted research with AI. I'm going to click back on Louisiana. So this is utilizing AI assisted tools to help you research. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about here as we wrap up is that this search box does work well with kind of what I call research train of thought. And so I already have a search prompted here, and this is also on the outline that I sent to your professor. So this is just an example. So I just sort of typed in a little bit of the hypothetical. My mom was in a car wreck down the street from our house. I ran over to the accident just as she was being placed into the ambulance. Do I have a cause of action for negligent infliction of emotional distress? I can click submit, and it will start running through Louisiana materials and anything else, secondary sources, all the rest of Westlaw, reading through all of this material, trying to find an answer to my prompt. It does take a little bit of time. I've already run this search just because I knew I'd be running close to time at this point. So what I like about AI assisted research that's a little bit different than the searches that I've been doing is that it kind of gives me a little bit of an answer at the top of my result. That being said, I always stress that you need to be cautious with this answer, especially if you don't know a lot about this topic. And you definitely need to continue doing more research and seeing if this information is correct for what you need it for. But here I have my Louisiana Civil Code article 2315.6. It's also breaking down what elements I need to recover and that if they need to be satisfied. And just again, a little bit more information, as well as all of the content that it's referencing down below, broken down into cases, statutes, administrative materials, any practice materials if available, current awareness, news and information, as well as secondary sources. So again, Westlaw AI is just another tool in your toolkit to play around with and try. As I've been doing with my searches in Westlaw Precision, just keeping my searches really basic and simple. Westlaw AI, as I've just demonstrated, works really well with kind of, again, just your train of thought, your facts, a few sentences, any of the elements that you might need to include in your research. All right, so I'm going to wrap up before I leave a few minutes for questions. As you noted, when I was in my searching, I utilized my history to go back to Spencer just a minute ago. Your history stays on your password for 1 full year, so you can go back to any searches, documents, key sites, key numbers, anything that you've been doing for the past year, and this will start to drop off after a year. I'm going to hop into that Louisiana 1L memo folder that I created. So I've been dropping documents into that folder as I was researching and just saving things to come back to. So this is where you can store all of your cases, all of your statutes, and have quick and easy access to them. You can create folders for all of your classes. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight was this pop-up. Once you start having about a dozen or a couple dozen documents, statutes, cases, secondary materials, recommendations will start coming up based on what you have in your folder. One thing that I did want to say is we're not saying that these are better or the best documents or that you need them. We're just saying based on what you have in your folder, these might also be helpful. So while here it's also suggesting White v. Monsanto, the one case that I saw in Keysight citing sided with. So I might want to go back and take a look at this case just to make sure I don't need it, or maybe it'll give me a good idea of another path that I could take. So I did want to highlight your foldering system for that. And it's also why I have different folders. So I wouldn't put my torts class folder in with my memo information, because you're going to have like false imprisonment and all different kinds of torts information in with your memo assignment. So keep your folders separate. And then the final option that we did was the favorites. And I probably should have added a few more favorites in here. I have a few. So remember when I did my search at the beginning, that was searching in Louisiana primary law as well as all the rest of Westlaw. Quite a bit, over 40,000 databases. But now I've created my own little database bank of information. And so now I'm only going to search it in places that I know are my jurisdiction, are my topic, are things that I need, saving myself all of that, going through or seeing results from jury instructions and legislative materials and so on. So instead of over 14,000 documents, now I have under 1,000 to look at. And I know it's my jurisdiction and it's my practice area. And so this to me is a great time saver. And again, just a great way to be a little bit more effective and efficient with your time so that you can get to the analytical portion and the writing portion of your research. So those were the things that I wanted to highlight. I did leave my email up here at the top. Remember, you can still always find me on the main login page under Contact Us. I'm going to stop the recording and then leave some, whoops.